In the late 1990s, American cars were changing, leaving behind the excess of previous decades and moving into a cleaner phase, more aerodynamic, more design-focused. Smoother lines, better proportions, a different way of standing out. And right in the middle of that shift, a few models did it better than the rest. Cars that didn't just look good back then, but even today, still have presence, still stand out, and in many cases, are still underestimated. So in this video, you're going to discover the most beautiful American cars of the 1990s, and more than one of them might surprise you more than you expect. 1996 Dodge Viper GTS. This car wasn't designed to please. It was designed to hit you, and you feel that from the very first second. Because the Viper GTS doesn't follow 90s logic. It's not soft, it's not subtle, it doesn't try to fit into the cleaner design trends of the era. It does the opposite. It's low, wide, aggressive, with proportions that still feel extreme even today. That long hood, the air intakes, the muscular rear, everything points to one idea: controlled excess. And that's what makes it so special, because in a decade where many cars were chasing balance, this one chose to keep the brutality, but now with more shape, more refinement, more identity, especially in this coupe version. The roof, that iconic double bubble, isn't just there for looks. It helps with aerodynamics and headroom, but it also becomes one of the most recognizable silhouettes of the entire decade. And that's no accident. Under the hood, an 8-liter V10 pushing around 450 horsepower, a wild number for its time. But here more than ever, the design matches the power, because this car doesn't just feel fast, it looks fast. There's a key detail. The Viper GTS helped define what an American sports car looked like in the 90s. No meaningful electronic aids, no filters, no softening the experience, and that shows in its design. It's honest. When you look at its value today, that reflects it. A Viper GTS can easily range from $70,000 to $120,000, depending on condition and version. 1997 Chevrolet Corvette C5. This car doesn't look revolutionary, but it was, because the Corvette C5 didn't need to exaggerate to stand out. It didn't have to be as aggressive as the Viper, or break every rule. It did something smarter. It refined everything. Imagine the moment. After years with the C4, Chevrolet needed something new, something that felt more modern, more cohesive, more aligned with where the 90s were heading. And this was the answer: a smoother design, more continuous, no unnecessary cuts, no competing lines. Everything is integrated, everything connects, and that creates a shape that ages far better than many cars from the same era. Because here, there's no excess, there's balance. Pop-up headlights, low profile, wide rear stance, everything communicates sports car, but without overdoing it. And that's hard to achieve. Under the hood, a 5.7-liter LS 1 V8 making around 345 horsepower. A strong number, but once again, that's not what defines the car, because the design doesn't try to shout, it tries to work. And it does. There's a key detail. The C5 is the Corvette that truly modernized the model's image, not just in performance, but in how it looked and felt. More serious, more refined, almost more European in some aspects, more complete. And you can still see that today. When you look at its value, that's reflected too. A Corvette C5 typically sits between $20,000 and $40,000, depending on condition and version. It's not the loudest, not the most radical, but probably one of the most well-resolved designs of the decade. 1991 Buick Reatta. This car doesn't look special, and that's exactly what makes it interesting, because the Reatta wasn't designed to impress at first glance. It doesn't have aggressive lines. It doesn't rely on exaggerated proportions. It doesn't try to compete with sports cars. It's subtle, but when you really look at it, everything shifts. Imagine the context. Early 1990s, Buick trying to do something different, something more refined, more personal, almost like a compact Grand Tourer. And this was the answer: a shorter car, more contained, with clean proportions, no excess, no drama, everything is smooth, everything flows. And that creates a very specific feeling because this car doesn't try to grab attention, but it doesn't disappear either. The rounded lines, the roofline, the way everything feels integrated gives the design a sense of being ahead of its time, especially when you compare it to other American cars from the same era. Under the hood, a 3.8-liter V6 making around 165 to 170 horsepower. Not fast, and not trying to be. But that was never the point, because here, design isn't serving speed, it's serving identity. Here's the key detail. The Reatta was built in a specialized facility, with a much more handcrafted approach compared to other Buick models, and you can feel that in the way the car comes together. When you look at its value today, that reflects it. A Reatta typically ranges between $10,000 and $25,000, depending on condition. And now I want to know something. What do you think about this kind of understated design? Do you prefer it over the aggressive sports cars we saw earlier? Or do you lean more towards something like the Viper that demands attention instantly? I'll see you in the comments. 1993 Cadillac Allante. This car doesn't feel American, and that's exactly why it stands out. Because the Allante was one of the most unusual moves Cadillac ever made. It wasn't trying to compete with muscle cars or traditional sports cars. It was aiming for something completely different, European elegance, with an American soul. Imagine the context, early 1990s, Cadillac trying to redefine itself, wanting to offer something more refined, more global, something that could stand next to European roadsters. And the solution was anything but typical. The design was handled by Pininfarina in Italy. Yes, the same studio behind many Ferraris. And that alone changes everything. The proportions feel different, more compact, more balanced, with clean, sophisticated lines. No excess, no drama. Everything is controlled, everything is elegant, and that separates it completely from most American cars of its time. But it's not just the design, it's the perception, because this car doesn't try to dominate. It tries to convince you. Under the hood, in its later versions, a 4.6-liter Northstar V8 producing around 295 horsepower. A strong number, but once again, not what defines the car. Because the Allante isn't aggressive, it's refined, and that shows in every detail. Here's the key detail. The bodies were built in Italy, and then transported to the United States for final assembly. An expensive, complex, and completely unusual process. And that alone makes it special. When you look at its value today, that's reflected as well. An Allante typically ranges between $10,000 and $30,000, depending on condition. 1992 Dodge Stealth RT Turbo. This car doesn't look like what it is, and that's everything. Because the Stealth RT Turbo doesn't fit the classic idea of an American car. It's not big, it's not heavy, it doesn't rely on that traditional brute force approach. It's lower, more technical, more precise, and that completely changes its identity. Imagine the context. Early 1990s, Dodge trying to compete in a different arena, one where technology was starting to matter just as much as raw power. And this was the answer, a car that already feels different visually. Sharper lines, tighter proportions, a silhouette much closer to Japanese sports cars of the era than traditional American machines. And that's no coincidence, because this car doesn't follow the usual rules, it breaks them. Under the hood, a 3.0-liter twin-turbo V6 producing around 300 horsepower. But that's only part of the story. All-wheel drive, four-wheel steering, active suspension in some versions, technology that wasn't common at the time. And that changes everything, because this car doesn't just accelerate, it reacts. It adapts. And that's reflected in how it looks too. More complex, more technical, more focused. Here's the key detail. The Stealth was co-developed with Mitsubishi, sharing its platform with the Mitsubishi 3000 GT. And that explains its completely different philosophy. But instead of being a weakness, it's exactly what makes it special. Because this car doesn't try to be what people expect. It tries to be better at something else. When you look at its value today, that reflects it. A Stealth R/T Turbo typically ranges between $20,000 and $50,000, depending on condition. 1999 Ford Mustang SVT Cobra. This car does look like what it is, and still, it surprises, because by the late 90s, the Mustang already had an identity. It was recognizable, it didn't need reinvention. But in this version, it evolves. It becomes sharper, more aggressive, more focused, and that shifts the perception. Imagine the moment, Ford introducing the new edge design, harder lines, more defined angles, a more technical look compared to previous generations. And the result is this, a car that keeps the classic foundation, but pushes it forward. Tighter surfaces, sharper details, the way light moves across the body, everything feels more intentional, more character. And that's what makes it stand out. Under the hood, a 4.6-liter V8 officially rated at 320 horsepower, a strong number, but like many cars on this list, that's not the whole story, because this car doesn't just feel powerful, it looks the part, and that's essential to its design. Here's an important detail. The SVT Cobra was the most focused version of the Mustang at the time, a more serious, more refined, more complete interpretation of the platform, and that shows in how it's perceived even today. When you look at its value now, that reflects it as well. A 1999 SVT Cobra typically ranges between $25,000 and $60,000, depending on condition. And now, I want to know something. Out of what we've seen so far, which design speaks to you more? The Stealth with its technical, almost futuristic approach, or this Mustang, more classic, but evolved? I'll see you in the comments. 1996 Lincoln Mark VIII. This car doesn't try to get your attention, but when it does, it's already too late, because the Mark VIII is one of those cases where design doesn't shout, it doesn't exaggerate, it doesn't try to dominate from the first second. It's smooth, very smooth. And that's exactly where its strength comes from. Imagine the context. Mid-1990s. Manufacturers chasing cleaner lines, more aerodynamic shapes, moving away from boxy designs. And Lincoln takes that idea further than most. The result is this: a large coupe, elegant, but with a level of fluidity that wasn't common in American cars of this size. The lines are continuous, uninterrupted, no sharp breaks, everything flows, and that creates a silhouette that feels ahead of its time, especially at the rear. That slope, that clean, almost minimal design, it doesn't try to impress, but it ends up standing out anyway. Under the hood, a 4.6-liter V8 producing around 280 horsepower. A solid number, but again, not what defines the car. Because here, design leads everything, and that design is built around something very specific: visual efficiency, aerodynamics, balance. Here's the key detail. The Mark VIII was one of the most aerodynamic cars Lincoln had ever produced at the time, and you can see it in every line. No excess, no unnecessary elements. Everything has a purpose. When you look at its value today, that reflects it. A Mark VIII typically ranges between $10,000 and $25,000, depending on condition. 1994 Chevrolet Impala SS. This car doesn't try to be beautiful, but it ends up being exactly that, and that's what makes it so special. Because the Impala SS doesn't follow any of the usual attractive design rules. It's not low, not sporty in proportions. It doesn't rely on aggressive lines or complex details. It's big, heavy, simple, and yet it works. Imagine the context. Mid-1990s. Cars becoming more aerodynamic, more rounded, more refined. And suddenly, this shows up. A full-size sedan, completely blacked out, stripped of unnecessary details, with a presence that doesn't try to please, it tries to impose. And that changes everything. Because this car isn't beautiful in the traditional sense. It's beautiful because of its attitude, the way it stands, the way it occupies space, the way it feels, the black paint, the minimal trim, the wheels. Everything is reduced to the essentials, and that gives it a very strong identity. Under the hood, a 5.7-liter LT1 V8 producing around 260 horsepower. Not the most powerful on the list, but as always, it's not about the number, it's about the whole package, because this car doesn't try to look fast, but it feels solid, planted, deliberate, and that's reflected in its design too. Here's the key detail. The Impala SS was, in many ways, a modern reinterpretation of a classic idea. A big sedan with real character, something that wasn't common at the time. And that's exactly why it stood out. When you look at its value today, that reflects it as well. An Impala SS typically ranges between $20,000 and $50,000, depending on condition. 1999 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am WS6. This car doesn't try to be subtle, and that's exactly why it's unforgettable. Because the Trans Am WS6 represents the opposite extreme of 90s design. While some cars were chasing clean lines, balance, smooth shapes, this one does the opposite. It exaggerates, and it does it on purpose. Imagine the moment, late 1990s, automotive design becoming more restrained, more refined, and Pontiac decides to push in the other direction. More aggression, more presence, more visual impact. And the result is this: a car that sits low, wide, with a stance that looks ready to attack even when standing still. The hood with those aggressive air intakes, the pop-up headlights, the wide rear, everything feels tense, everything feels alive, and that separates it completely from the rest, because this car doesn't try to please everyone. It tries to leave a mark. Under the hood, a 5.7-liter LS1 V8, producing around 320 to 325 horsepower, a strong number. But like the Viper, the design matches the power, because this car doesn't just feel fast, it looks fast, and that's essential. Here's the key detail. The WS6 package wasn't just visual, it included real upgrades to intake, suspension, and overall performance, and that reinforces the car's identity even more. It's not just appearance, it's coherence. When you look at its value today, that reflects it. A Trans Am WS6 typically ranges between $25,000 and $60,000, depending on condition. 1998 Plymouth Prowler. This car doesn't feel real, and yet it came out of a factory, because the Prowler doesn't follow any normal production logic. It wasn't born from necessity. It doesn't answer a clear trend. It's an idea taken too far. Imagine the context. Late 1990s, design becoming safer, more predictable, more focused on efficiency. And suddenly, this appears. A car inspired by classic hot rods, but reinterpreted in a modern, almost experimental way. The exposed front wheels, the minimal body, the completely unconventional proportions, everything feels closer to a concept car than something you could actually buy. And that's exactly what makes it so special. Because this car doesn't try to be logical, it tries to be different, and it succeeds. There's nothing else like it from that era, not even today. Under the hood, a 3.5-liter V6 producing around 250 horsepower. Not extreme in performance, but that was never the goal, because here, design is everything, and that design doesn't try to convince you, it forces a reaction. Here's the key detail. The Prowler was one of the few production cars to directly capture the essence of classic hot rods without copying them, reinterpreting the idea with modern engineering, and that makes it truly unique. When you look at its value today, that reflects it. A Prowler typically ranges between $30,000 and $60,000, depending on condition. And when you step back and look at all these cars together, you start to notice something. Beauty in the 90s didn't follow a single rule. It was a mix, a decade where some cars chased balance, others pushed exaggeration, and others simply tried to be different. And that's exactly what makes them so interesting today. Now, I want to know something. Out of everything you saw in this video, which one truly stands out to you? The one that made you think, this is different? I'll see you in the comments. And if you want to understand where all of this started, you need to watch the video about the most beautiful cars of the 1980s. Because there, you'll see a completely different aesthetic. And when you compare it to the 90s, you'll clearly understand how everything changed. See you in the next video.